Hello creeps! And today I have my reading wrap up for March. So here are all the books that I read this month, and we're just gonna go through in the order that I read them throughout the month, and then I'll just tell you my feelings about them. Oh, before I start, guys, I made a Goodreads, and I've never had one before, and I honestly thought that it was just kind of a way to keep track of what you were reading. I really didn't know much about it. And so I got a Goodreads. I know that some of you have asked me what my Goodreads is, so I'll leave it linked down below. But it's so much cooler than I thought. I never had one before because I just had a reading journal and that's where I kept all my stuff. So I didn't think that it was necessary. And it's so cool to go through and see you guys, like what everybody's reading and like what they're rating things, and it's so cool. So I actually really enjoy it. I think that it's a blast, and I understand why people are obsessed with it. My husband said, oh, so it's social media for people who love books. He may have said book nerds, but I was like, yeah, I guess it is. And it's really neat. Like, I really like going through and seeing what everyone's reading and everything and what they want to read. You can have a whole list of what you want to read. It's really neat. The only thing I will say, my only issue so far, you can't rate books other than like full stars. That drives me crazy. And that's why I haven't rated all the books that I've read, because I'm very specific with my ratings. I can't just give it a 3-star rating if it's a 3.5 star, or a 4-star rating if it's a 4.5 star. So anyways, that's my only issue so far. But let's just get into the books. We got quite a lot to go through, so let's begin with James Herbert's The Fog. So this was my first James Herbert book, and I will say that for it being published in 1975, it's pretty messed up. Like, there's some pretty messed up stuff that happens in this book. It's about this fog that comes to this town, and well, I guess it gets released from the ground, and it makes people just kind of lose their shit. They either take their own lives or take other people's lives, and it's just, you know, nobody knows really what's going on, because you can't, I mean, you can see the fog, but nobody can tell the difference between that and real fog, and it takes a while for authorities to realize what's going on, and blah, blah, blah. So I have mixed feelings about this one, because on one hand, the first like 100 pages, I was like, oh my god, this is so cool. It's so good. The death scenes are really brutal. There's even like stuff that happens with a priest and his congregation, and you're like, oh, you actually went there. Really messed up, especially for being published in the 70s. However, as I was reading it, I was comparing it to Salem's Lot, because that book came out at the same time too. And although this one is definitely way more intense than Salem's Lot, sometimes it's hard reading an older book and you have to take into account the time period that it's written. And obviously I wasn't alive in the 70s, so I don't know what other books were out there, you know? So I kept being like, well, you know, it was written a long time ago, and for the time it was probably a great book. And that probably is still true. However, there's a few things that I didn't absolutely love about this book. One of them, and it's not that I didn't enjoy it, because I really loved reading the stories of what happened to the individual people, but you'll have a 10-page story just to have that person die over and over and over and over again. So it would have been cool if they somehow wrapped back around, or they made sense and there was a reason for them there, but otherwise there wasn't necessarily a reason other than just like, oh, it's cool, a bunch of death, which isn't a problem, okay? And I didn't hate the book for this at all, but I just kept thinking of how this was structured versus a book like Salem's Lot, where everything kind of wraps back around and you have a whole town and things come back together, and it's just a brilliantly constructed narrative, right? Whereas this one I felt like was just, well, why am I reading 10 pages about this guy's life if he's just gonna die anyways, you know? Although the deaths were very cool. So I'm not complaining, but I also kind of am. And also, the other thing was, I really did enjoy those deaths, and like, they were very drastic in a lot of cases, really intense, and I did really enjoy that. However, there's probably about 100 pages in here where the military is trying to trap this fog, and it just didn't keep me that engaged, if I'm honest. And so I didn't hate this book by any means. I will absolutely read other James Herbert books, but let me know if you have other favorites other than this, or let me know if you completely disagree with me and you absolutely love this book. I'm curious on other people's thoughts, because I don't know anyone in my life that has read any James Herbert books. So I know some of you guys have. So let me know how you guys feel about that. This one I made a whole video about. This is Lisa Jewell's None of This Is True. And this is about a woman who meets her birthday twin at a restaurant. And she's like kind of weird and socially awkward. She learns that this other woman named Alex is actually a podcaster. Josie, the socially awkward one, asks Alex if Alex would like to do a podcast on her life, on Josie's life. And at first Alex is pretty apprehensive. She's like, who are you? What do you mean? But then after she starts getting to know Josie and learning about her life, she starts thinking that it might actually make a good podcast. And it's written in an interesting way where it's written like as it's happening in the past, but then you get kind of flash forwards from this Netflix documentary that's happening about these two women that like shows their story, you know? So you learn that it was eventually made into a documentary, and so you don't quite know what happened. But the reason I think I loved this book so much is because it doesn't feel to me like a typical thriller book. Like, her writing is so cool that she gives you all of the clues for you to unravel, and there's not like a huge twist, you know what I mean, at the end where you're just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that, like some of the other thriller books do, where they kind of feel like they have to keep giving you twists and turns to keep you engaged. Like, she really does just reveal things slowly for you, and you have all the evidence in front of you, but the story is just freaking good and entertaining, and it's well written, and she doesn't have to use a lot of these literary techniques or tropes that a lot of other thriller writers use. And so I really respect her writing. I have read a few of her other books. Actually, another one is in here, and this one has still been my favorite so far. But yeah, I really enjoyed that one. You just go on the story and find out what happened in Josie's past and in Alex's life as well, with her marriage and her children and things like that. So next up, I read Philip K. Dick's We Can Build You. This is also an older book. I believe this is the 70s. Yeah, 1972. And this is about two men. They have a company, but they're trying to kind of switch gears because their electronic organ that they're selling is kind of falling off. And so they need something to produce that's more modern. They end up building this machine, this robot, and they're using Civil War historical figures around the Civil War for the identities of their robots. And that way they can kind of program these robots with all the information from, you know, history books or whatever. And so you have this like functioning robot. Okay, so they make Abraham Lincoln, and then they also make, well, his name is Edwin M. Stanton. He's someone in relation to Lincoln, like his secretary or something, I can't remember. The story is just about these two guys running this company, and then there's also this billionaire that kind of gets involved and mixed in with them as well. And it is an interesting read, and there's definitely some interesting stuff to analyze in here. I think one of the most interesting aspects of the book is you have a conversation about what a human is between this robot and this human. Did I take notes on this one? I may have taken notes. Hold on. I took notes somewhere. See, this is the problem, is I have a reading journal and then I just write random notes in my phone or on random pieces of paper, and then I have no idea where the notes are. Anyways, I will keep better notes in the future. But yeah, it was also interesting because at first I thought that the robots were kind of the more likable characters because they were helpful and they had all the information. And then I started to realize that that wasn't true. And you had the humans, which were much more flawed, but that's what makes them human. You also have other aspects too, like a bunch of the population is put into these mental health clinics as well, and so that comes into the plot. There's a lot going on in here, but an interesting book to read, and I enjoy Philip K. Dick's work. Not my favorite Philip K. Dick book, but it was still really interesting to read. Okay, the next one that I got was Murder Road by Simone St. James. Now, I have really enjoyed the two books that I read of hers last year. I don't have my glasses on, so I can't see them. Oh, Sundown Motel and The Broken Girls, something like that. I was really excited because this was her new book that came out this year. So I picked it up. I was a little disappointed. And to be honest, I don't even think that there's anything wrong with this book. And in fact, if you like just like ghost stories. Like, it was fine. There was nothing wrong with it. It was about this couple, this man and a woman, and they go into this town. As they're driving in, they realize that they're kind of lost, and a girl is on the side of the road, obviously hurt. So they pull over to try to help her, and then they realize that someone's after her. They bring her to the hospital, and then an investigation opens whether they were the ones that harmed this girl or not. And so then they kind of insert themselves into this story where a bunch of hitchhikers have been abducted or murdered or disappeared along this specific road, murder road, and they want to solve what happened. This one, there wasn't anything wrong with it, but I think I just went into it thinking it was going to be like her other books, which I know I'm such a hypocrite, and I always talk about how, like, you can't compare one book to another book, you know what I mean, even from the same author. So yes, I'm a hypocrite. It's okay, you can tell me. But I think my issue was in her other books, the paranormal stuff just takes a back seat, and it's just kind of like a fun addition, whereas this one, it was just a ghost story. And I just don't really like ghost stories. I gotta be honest, there's so few and far between where I find a ghost story that I actually enjoy, that I don't find like hokey or silly. I hope you guys know by now that I'm never trying to ever deter you from reading a book, even if it's a book that I don't like. I know other people will like it. So yeah, it was just my opinion that I didn't like that one as much as her other books. And it was just more of a plain ghost story. And I would say though, if you like ghost stories, like especially if you like Darcy Coates' ghost stories, you would probably really enjoy that one. It just wasn't a book for me, to be honest. Next, I read this Bloodbaths and Banana Cakes by Addison Moore. This is my cozy mystery series about a murder in a small town, and this baker solves the murder. That's kind of all there is to say about that one, but it was just, we're heating up now, okay? We got a love triangle between two ex-stepbrothers and this girl, and yeah, it's getting real dramatic. So yeah, that was just the cozy mystery that I read. Next, I read Lisa Jewell's The Night She Disappeared, and this one was okay. I didn't love this one as much as I loved the other Lisa Jewell book. Like, I would have honestly rated that a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I loved that book. This one was 4 stars. It was still a great thriller, extremely well written, but it just was very different from that book. This one felt like more of a traditional thriller, which it's a thriller book. There's nothing wrong with that. But whereas that one, I felt like there was something unique and special about it outside of the thriller genre, like outside of all those tropes and stuff. This one just felt like reading a typical thriller, which again, nothing wrong. It's about a teen mom. She lives with her mom and her baby and her boyfriend, but you come to find out that she's not really super interested in her boyfriend, and he can be kind of controlling, but then also he's very dead set on keeping them together and fixing their relationship, and they end up disappearing, the young couple. So the mom of the young couple is now stuck with the baby and freaking out because she doesn't know what happened to her kids. So she starts to piece together this story along with this other woman who comes to work at a school nearby. Well, I guess it's her boyfriend that starts to work at the school, and she just ends up living there. She ends up finding something from this missing couple that disappeared and ends up coming to the mom. And so both of them kind of work together to try to solve what actually happened, if her daughter's alive, if the boyfriend's alive, where they are, what's going on. And so yeah, that's this book. Just kind of a typical disappearance book. Nothing too crazy about it, but it was fine. You know, it was fine. Yeah, it was fine. I still enjoyed reading it. It was good for a thriller. But next, my friends, I read Negative Space by, is it B.R. Yeager or Yeager or Yager? I'm not sure. But anyways, this book was phenomenal. Phenomenal. I loved every page of this book. It is, how can I even tell you what this book is about? Because I don't even know. It's about 3 characters, and it's almost like stream of consciousness, kind of. But you have 3 separate characters, and they're just kind of bringing you through their lives or a specific period. Sometimes all 3 characters are talking about one incident. Sometimes they're all talking about separate incidences, but it's just a very interesting way that this narrative is weaved. But basically, they're all telling you about this character named Tyler. And so I love books like this. It's kind of like that Tarantino Reservoir Dogs thing where the whole movie is about a heist, but you never actually get to see the heist. Well, this entire book is about this character named Tyler. And although you are introduced to him and you get to see him, you never get his perspective on any of this. So it does make the story very, very interesting. This book is like a 4.5-star read to me. Like I loved this novel. And I don't actually want to tell you too much about it, but all I will say is that there's this new drug on the market and weird things are happening in relation to this drug. You also have this small town where a lot of suicides are taking place. But this book is just so strange. I feel like it needs a whole video on its own. And so I've been thinking, I don't know how you guys feel about this, because I feel like these videos haven't done great in the past, but there's also just some videos that I feel like I need to make for me. And so lately I've just been thinking of specific books that are just on my mind. I cannot stop thinking about them. This is one of them. And I kind of just want to do a separate video where I do give things away, but we can talk in the comments and share ideas about how we feel about them or what have you. So this might end up being in a separate video because it just needs a whole, you know, 10, 15, 20 minutes all to itself because there's so much to untangle there. You know what? I'll post, probably the next video I post will be a different book, kind of a deep dive into that, and then you guys can let me know how you feel and if I should continue videos like that or if you'd rather them being more vague where I don't ruin anything for the reader. So you guys can watch my videos if you haven't read the book. I don't know. Anyways, next I read this Irene Iddesleigh book by Amanda McKittrick Ross. I'm not going to talk about this one because I just did a whole video on it. It is said to be one of the worst books ever written, and it's just about a marriage that didn't work out, but check out that video if you're interested in that. And then the last book that I read was Closer by Dennis Cooper. And this was, wow, this was an interesting ride. Okay, so this is kind of about a group of high school students. Actually, now that I think about it, one of the guys isn't a high school student, he's an older male. But each chapter is from a different kid male's perspective. It all centers around this guy named George Miles. The back just says, physically beautiful and strangely passive, George Miles becomes the object of his friends' passions, and one after another, they ransack him for love or anything else. Again, this is another one where I just feel like I need a whole nother video to talk about this, but basically George is this beautiful guy. This book is an older book as well. It takes place, or it was written in 1989, and pretty much every male in this book is gay, and there's not, like, it's a world where that doesn't really matter. Like, there's very rare instances where people say anything about them being gay. So that is interesting in itself because it takes place in the 80s. It's also just really interesting how all of the characters, they either do use George or they lust after him. And there's one specific line in the back here that really stuck with me. It's talking about drugs and stuff, but we're going to skip that part. It says, people don't really know one another except when they're speaking. As soon as they shut up, no matter how close they've been, the understanding is gone. It's just an interesting kind of look at relationships, and I guess not really platonic relationships, but more romantic relationships between young partners. Again, there's a lot to kind of analyze in here, and it was my first read of any Dennis Cooper book. It's also told in such a mundane, like a high school kid not caring fashion, you know? And you do have some really interesting characters, like this guy who pretends like he's famous. You also have an older relationship between one of the teens and a guy who's like in his 40s, and disturbing things that happen. But basically, George Miles, all he cares about is love, and all he cares about is connection, and everyone in his life is just too wrapped up in their own shit to care. And if that is not a reflection of every fucking relationship in life, I don't know what is. So there was just a lot that I felt like I even connected with, and I'm not a man in my teens or anything, and obviously on a deeper level too, especially considering what happens to George and stuff. But yeah, I don't know, I really enjoyed this one. I've seen people compare it to Less Than Zero, and then I've seen other people get mad at comparing it to Less Than Zero. The thing that it does is, oh, I wrote notes on this one. Yeah, I said they're all too fucked up and occupied with their own existence to think about anyone else. I said sex is used in such an unsexy manner. It does not glorify sexual relationships at all. I thought that that was a really interesting way to approach, especially young relationships, often with people that don't even like each other, appreciate each other, respect each other. and it's used in ways that are supposed to gross you out. Like it's purposefully unsexy. It's not romanticizing sex at all. And I do see a connection with Less Than Zero, and I do think that if you enjoy Less Than Zero, you'd probably like this book. I mean, the writing is very, very different. They're not similar to one another, and I feel like they do have a lot of differences. Less Than Zero is so nihilistic, and this one is just more hopeful. Like the kids, I feel like, are hopeful. At least George is hopeful of finding that connection with people, but he just continually gets let down throughout the story. I think this is one of multiple books with that character George in it, so I will absolutely pick up more of those. But it was my first introduction to Dennis Cooper, and yeah, now I know what his works are kind of like, so I'm excited to pick up more. Actually, I think I do have one other from him, so I'm sure I'll be reading that soon. So those are the books that I read this year. I think my favorites were probably Negative Space and That None of This Is True. I read a lot of good stuff this month. It was a pretty good reading month. Please feel free to let me know what you guys read down below, or what your favorite books were or whatever. Feel free to follow me on Instagram or Goodreads if you're interested in finding out what I'm reading between doing videos like this, or to see a lot of videos of my pets, because that's really all I post. But anyways, my husband is calling me. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon with another horror video. Bye guys.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.